I want to quickly talk to you about a few controversial truths about podcast success and failure. Okay. The thing is, podcasting is a very competitive niche. And sometimes you see some podcasts that are very successful and others are less successful. And people actually talk about a lot of things that can really lead to the success or failure of a podcast. Let me first share with you some top truths. Okay. The first reason why most podcasts fail is that they lack a clear niche. Now, having a clear niche is kind of good or bad. It depends on how you actually go about it. Let me first define for you why your podcast can fail if you don't have a clear niche. If you don't have a clear niche, you are speaking to everybody. And you know the saying, if you're trying to please everybody, you're not going to please anybody, right? Let me repeat that. If you are trying to please anybody, if you're trying to please everybody, you're not going to you will end up not actually pleasing anybody. So that's why it's important to have a niche, at least to start with a niche, because a niche is going to help you actually look at the kind of angle you need to really focus on when covering a specific topic. It's important, but think about it globally, because podcasting is a global business. It's not just an American business anymore, or European business, or let's say a Canadian business anymore. Podcasting is global nowadays because everybody has a smartphone, and you can actually listen from a you can listen to a podcast from your phone actually. So potentially anybody, I mean the whole wild world, the whole world can listen to your podcast. So you have about 5 to 6 million podcasts globally. So if you don't have a niche, a clear niche, you are going to actually you are going to drawn into a sea of competition. So a niche will help you big time in terms of differentiating yourself. But that's one side. Now, a niche could also be a little limiting. If you actually have a niche that is too restrictive, that can be really detrimental to your creativity, and in terms of topic choices, but also in terms of guest choices. So when you choose a niche, make sure the niche is, I would say, not too small. The niche has to be decent sized niche, not too large, because when it's too large, it's not a niche anymore. But it can't be too small either. So trying to have an average size niche, that's important, so that when you have a niche, at least you give yourself some creative freedom, right? You can explore the primary topic around the niche, but also the secondary topics that could be interesting to your target audience. Let me talk to you about another controversial truth about podcast success and failure. You hear a lot about frequency. So people talk about, like podcasts fail because they don't publish regularly. Now, the whole idea about regular publication is true. I mean, basically, you want to be a little bit consistent. If you want to be successful as a podcaster, you got to really set a time frame and stick to it. It can be once a month. It can be once a week. It can be every week. It can be every day, rather. It, it can be a once every 2 weeks, once a fortnight, whatever. So you got to have some kind of frequency. Why? Because see, the frequency is going to help you be consistent, and consistency is going to breed success. The whole thing is that when you have a routine, when you have some kind of planning, that's going to help you. And maybe if you have a team behind you, that's going to help you and your team actually get closer to reaching your goals. It's important to structure your day. It's important to structure your podcast. So having that regularity can really help you big time, especially if you are trying to really draw a certain target audience. That frequency is going to really make your target audience know, hey, listen, every week I'm going to hear about this and this topic for 1 hour or 30 minutes. So regularity is going to be very important, okay, in that sense. But if you're regular, you need to vary the topics that you are covering. So simply having a podcast every Thursday at 8 p.m. But if the content is not really diverse enough, you're gonna lose listeners. Okay, so that's important. So regularity is important. But now let me talk about the flip side of regularity. I mean, everybody's just say, well, you got to be consistent, blah 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 blah. Yes, but consistency doesn't have anything to do with timing or frequency. The whole thing is that you can have a podcast that is not regular, but if you have a captive audience, if you have an audience that's supportive, they will work with you. They will work for you. So if they know, for instance, you know what, I'm just publishing the podcast once a week, but I don't care if it's on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever. But I'll publish it based on the niche, based on the target audience. Your audience will understand and really forgive you for not really sticking to a regular agenda. If you are able to be creative, if you are also infusing some of your personality in the podcast, and they like it. In other words, if you're able to add value, and your audience sees the value that you are adding every week or every 2 weeks or every month, they will forgive you. That's important. Another controversial truth about podcast success and failure that I hear a lot about is that basically this podcast fail because they have bad audio quality. Let me first talk about why audio quality is important, and then I'll speak to you about why it's not that important. Audio quality is important because when you think about podcasting, you are thinking about a medium that's primarily about audio, right? Not a lot of folks want to watch let's say, a video podcast. People want to listen to audios when they are in the subway, when they are maybe traveling, when they were driving. Okay, so at least they have the sound in the background. So podcasts are primarily audio. They are an audio thing. Now nowadays, you see a lot of podcasts trying to really get into the video thing. That's good. I mean, and part of it is because YouTube is trying to get into the podcast space big time, and they're just investing billions of dollars trying to really really capture the market. But what I want to say here is that basically podcasts are primarily audio, and if you have bad audio quality, you are going to lose big time. You're going to lose big time. You're going to lose traffic. You're going to lose listeners, and those listeners, once they're gone, they're gone. They are gone forever. Okay, so basically, what I want to say here is that audio quality can lead you to failure as a podcaster, but it depends on how crappy, how bad the quality really is in the first place. I mean, there is bad audio quality and there is worse audio quality. Let me repeat that. You have bad audio quality and then really, really bad audio quality. So if you have decent audio quality, you can still survive. And that leads to my point about why audio quality is not really that big of a thing. I mean, your audience understands that when you start, or when you are, let's say, in podcasting for a few months or a few years. I mean, not a few years, but a few months. You're still upgrading your equipment. As long as the host has a strong personality or gets to have great personality, and the content is well done, they'll forgive you if every now and then the audio quality is not really that where it should be at. Okay, if the quality is not where it should be at, they will forgive you. But just remember, there is bad quality, but also really really bad quality. So be careful there. You want to really make sure that you are doing your best to offer the best audio quality you can. The Another controversial truth about podcast success and failure this year is that basically the most podcasts fail because they are hard to find. Now there is an element of truth to that, but also an element of falsehood. Let me break it down for you. Basically, a podcast might fail if your target audience cannot find it. That's just a simple logistical issue, because you have podcast directories such as Spotify, you have Apple Podcast, you have you have Google Podcast, you have Amazon Podcast that really are repositories for podcasts globally. Those means what? This means that basically listeners go to those platforms to look to actually search for podcast and listen to platforms. So if you're not listed, if you're not actually if you're not listed in those directories, you don't have the foundation that you need to have to actually make your podcast, let's say, searchable or discoverable. Okay. So what I want to say here is that another way to a good reason why your podcast might not be discoverable is because it's there, but it has poor SEO tactics. In other words, you haven't invested a lot already, and you haven't invested a lot yet in terms of search engine optimization. Because the whole thing is that on those platforms, you still need to invest time polishing your tag techniques, your meta description, your podcast description, and so on and so forth. That way, you are able to place those platforms, the algorithm on those platforms, but also your target audience. Now, if your podcast is hard to find, this is not going to lead necessarily to failure right away. As long as you have other ways to have your podcast actually searchable, if you have other ways to publish your podcast, for instance, if anytime you have a podcast going out, you are able to send let's say a notice or notification on social media. This is a good opportunity. Or if you send an email to your newsletter list, if you let listeners know, for instance, that hey, listen, I have a new episode coming out. People will go and just listen to the episode based on your announcement. So the importance of directories is there, but don't overdo it. Don't overthink it. Another controversial truth that I hear about podcast success and failure is that basically the host loses motivation. And it's important to understand that basically podcasting is a long-term game, and there is a concept in the industry called pod fade. In other words, if you stop producing episodes because you lost motivation, the time and effort you put in do not produce the results you are expecting. Okay, so you think that the whole thing is a failure. Now there are a few important things to consider here. You can podcast in less than 2 hours per week. Okay, so many people waste time in the editing phase. So if you have a 15-minute episode, take 15 minutes to edit. Don't let this bog you down. Saying once in a while is fine. I mean, it's one of those things where we're all humans, okay? You're trying to do your best, okay? If you're losing motivation, this might be a good time to reconnect with your why. Why are you doing this in the first place? Why did you decide to podcast in the first place? Do you need to invest in a course or a program? Do you need to up level your branding? Are you showing up consistently? It's one of those things where you have to understand that if you have podcasting in your heart, if God has put podcasting in your heart, then you have to follow your path. Okay, do not give up. It's not an accident that you have this passion, this burning fire in you. That's an important element to think about. On the flip side, basically the motivation is not the only thing that could lead a podcast to failure. I mean, even if you had motivation, but you do not take care of your team, you do not take care of your support staff, like let's say, or your freelancers, those who are supporting your podcast. If you are growing, but you see, the whole thing is you only have 24 hours in a day, so you got to learn to delegate. You got to learn to delegate properly. It's one of those things where at the end of the day, you have to understand that you can only do maybe 8 hours. But if you are able to empower your team, they're going to help you big time. They're going to help your podcast grow, because you know what? This is their podcast too. This is not just your podcast. This is not your baby anymore. You have to learn to outsource it, and you have to learn to outsource properly. Let me give you a few extras here. You have to understand that when it comes to podcast success and failure, consistency consistency is one of the most important element. Okay, I mean, consistency has nothing to do with regularity. Consistency has nothing to do with timing. Consistency has to do with the schedule that you have, the structure that you have, and the passion you have behind. Okay, it's one of those things where when you actually have a podcast, when you start a podcast, or when you are trying to maintain a podcast, you got to be consistent in the sense that you want to stay focused and committed. It's one of those things where you got to constantly going back and ask yourself, why am I doing that? I think I just said it. Okay, so whether you have a daily, weekly, or monthly show, you cannot have loyal fans without a working schedule. Your fans are going to judge how regular you are, how committed you are, how serious you are, and most importantly, how committed you are. And fans are going to reward that commitment. Fans are going to reward that sort of a passion, that sort of intellectual ability. Okay, you also need to have you need to be a little bit authentic. Don't try to copy another podcaster. Be yourself. Be yourself. Be unique. You are unique. Be original. Okay, that's important because the whole thing is that with so many millions podcast hosts in the whole world, you're not going to really impress your audience by being a copycat. No. Okay. Also, think about your marketing. Marketing is important because otherwise, you can have the best host in the whole world, the best guests, the best content, the best episodes. But if you have no idea to let the whole world know, you are not going to really succeed. Okay. Think about learning how to promote your podcast. You can promote your podcast on social media, for instance. You can promote your podcast through through emails to your lists. You can promote your podcast in your network. You can promote your podcast on your website. You can promote your podcast on let's say industry platforms. Okay, it's one of those things where you have to understand what works and what doesn't work. What I want to say also finally is that your podcast might fail if you do not communicate properly with your audience. You do not engage with your audience. You do not have a conversation with them. You do not actually have content that resonates with them. See, the whole thing is that if you want your podcast to succeed, there has to be an element of chemistry between you and your audience because your audience are the number one reason why you exist. Remember that. You do not exist because you are so charismatic. You are a genius. You are so creative. You are so talented. No, no, no. Your audience are the ones. They are the real heroes here. They're the one actually helping you be who you are. Let me close to this conversation by giving you a few hacks here. When it comes to podcast success and failure, if you want to really be on the success side of things, you want to invest in the right areas. So right now you're listening to me, right? You got to really ask yourself, basically, what are the things that are not really working in your podcast? Is it the editing part, the transcription part, the preparation part, the intro, the outro, the marketing, the support staff that you have? What are the areas where you think you might need help? Or let's say the podcast itself might actually need some uplifting. This is where you want to invest. Okay, maybe you want to invest in upgrading the skill set of your team members or even your own skill set. Maybe you want to be a better communicator. You want to think about speaking skills, public speaking, for instance. You want to think about marketing. You want to think about financial management. You want to think about conflict resolution. You want to think about whatever it is that you need to really invest in to actually upgrade the skill set of your team but also yourself. Think about that, okay? And I want to close to this conversation by telling you that you have to constantly also think about benchmarking. Benchmarking means that you are seeing what's working in the industry. Think about the best practices in your industry, what your rivals are doing better than you, or what other podcast hosts are doing, and you're trying to really emulate what they're doing. Because the whole thing is that market research will tell you whether or not your podcast niche is actually a viable one. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Don't try to really do things randomly. You want to really do things a little bit. You want to create or even build a podcast based on a little bit of research, and that research has to be a constant. You have to really know what's working, what's working what's working in the market, and what's not working. In other words, you got to always base your decision making on the latest trends in the industry, because podcasting is changing all the time, because audiences tastes are shifting all the time, and also the bottom line is the platforms that are powering the platforms that are powering your podcast might also shift. I mean, now you have the emergence of artificial intelligence, and a lot of podcasting platform are including artificial intelligence actually in their processes. How is that going to affect you? Well, this is actually a topic for another show. So here's an epilogue into this conversation. I explained to you 5 controversial truths about podcast failure and success. I'll give you those top truths, the extras, and now the top hacks. Thank you so much. God bless you. I will see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.